Good morning, fellow viewers. When I spoke here last October, I discussed a serious subject, namely how climate change, the coronavirus, and racial discrimination are related. This morning, after more than 1 year of dealing with the virus, I've chosen to lighten up a bit. So my wish for you today is a few minutes of enjoyment, coupled with, I hope, an abiding sense of wonder, awe, and maybe even a modicum of humility. Having posed the question that is my title this morning, do you believe in miracles? I want to hastily add that I have no desire, no intent to engage in a semantic, theological, or philosophical discussion of miracles. In various talks I have given here, I have commented on how little we understand most, if not all, of the creatures with whom we share our earthly home. I have quoted Henry Beston, who so beautifully reminded us that other creatures have senses or abilities we have lost, or in some cases, never attained. Socrates observed that wisdom begins in wonder. And Albert Einstein postulated there are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. The longer I live, the closer I come to the second proposition. This morning, I hope you marvel at the true stories I'm about to share. We humans have shared our lives with dogs for tens of thousands of years. I can't think of any creature, any animal we should understand better. Yet, I cannot begin to explain the happenings I'm about to relate. Are they miracles? I don't know. All I do know is they are wonderful and awe-inspiring beyond my ability to understand or explain. First, let's have a few facts. Over 40% of French dog owners state that their dog is the single most important thing in their lives, even more important than their lover. Only the French can make a comment like that, I think. Nearly 100% of American dog owners say their dog provides them with companionship, love, company, and affection. 65% of US dog owners allow their canine companion to sleep with them in their bed. And of the remaining 35% of owners, nearly all have a special bed for their dog on the floor beside their own. 88% of dog owners in this country buy presents for their dog on birthdays, Christmas, Hanukkah, Easter, Halloween, and Valentine's Day. I don't recall ever giving my dog a Valentine's Day gift. Finally, since the early 1990s, it has become more and more evident that at least some dogs with no training whatsoever have been able to sniff out cancers in their owners in time for life-saving therapies to be established. Other dogs can accurately predict oncoming epileptic seizures in their owners. And diabetic dog owners have affirmed that their dogs can detect sharp falls in their blood sugar in sufficient time to prevent them from falling into hypoglycemic comas. Sadly, in this country, one dog is lost every 5 minutes. And only about 1 in 7 are reclaimed at animal shelters. I will now share 4 stories of dogs who somehow, either relocated their masters against seemingly insurmountable odds, In one case, the dog somehow divined the death of his master, disappeared for several days, and then appeared at the church for the funeral. And in another example, a dog hit by a car checked himself into a hospital emergency room and would not leave until attended by a physician. I am deeply moved every time I think or read these stories. Let's begin this morning with the story of Bobby, the Wonder Collie of Oregon, and his 3,000-mile trek through forest and farmland, rivers, mountains and plains, scorching heat and freezing cold. His travels are fully documented by letters from hundreds of men and women who assisted or befriended him on his journey. This remarkable story began in August 1923 when Mr. and Mrs. Frank Brasier began their long automotive journey from Oregon to Indiana to visit relatives. Bobby, the canine family member, rode on top of the luggage in the back seat of their open touring car. Deciding to visit relatives in Walcott, Indiana, before continuing 100 miles further east to Bluffton, their final goal, Frank drove the car with Bobby to a garage for a carburetor adjustment. As the big collie leaped from the back seat, he ran afoul of a formidable bull terrier, along with 7 or 8 of the terrier's buddies. Bobby saw he was greatly outnumbered and beat it out of town with a pack of growling dogs snapping at his heels. When the work on his automobile was completed, Frank drove around the town and nearby countryside, sounding the horn to summon Bobby. But no Bobby. The next day, the Brasiers placed an ad in the local newspaper and delayed the departure, waiting and hoping for a response of some kind. But no one seemed to have seen the big collie. Meanwhile, Bobby had escaped his tormentors, but he was left confused, shaken, and frightened. He was in completely unfamiliar territory, and all he wanted was to return to his master. But where was he? Bobby was so disoriented that he headed in the opposite direction from Walcott, approaching garages that had never contained the scent of Frank Brasier or his automobile. Although his sense of direction was temporarily skewed, his seemingly preternatural ability to detect dog lovers was firmly intact. Again and again, as he was nearing starvation, Bobby arrived at the home of kindly people who took him in and nurtured him back to health. Finally, Bobby appeared to gain a renewed sense of direction. And from what researchers could piece together, it was somewhere near Des Moines, Iowa, that Bobby turned west and never strayed from his course again. He swam rivers, survived blizzards, endured hunger and thirst, and climbed over mountains. Nearly 7 months later, a battered and worn Bobby was back in Oregon and somehow found his home. He nudged past a startled Mrs. Brasier and her daughter, dashed up the stairs to jump onto the bed where Frank lay sleeping after working the night shift at his restaurant. The startled man awakened to find his beloved collie licking his face and emitting howls of joy. Bobby refused to leave his master's bedroom that day, even to accept food and water. While not enough can be said about the collie's incredible endurance and survival, it is perhaps even more astounding to learn that when the complete story of Bobby's travel had been pieced together and Bobby's trail had been plotted on maps of the states he had traversed, it was discovered that the dog had managed to pick a very reasonable route with few detours. After initial confusion, it seemed as though Bobby had acquired a precise mental map that would take him home. 3,000 miles. Was that a miracle? Here's story number 2. Fabian Ortega owned a construction equipment rental business in Bellflower, California. And Buddy, his 6-year-old German Shepherd mix, was the chief of security. So Fabian was understandably worried one day when he realized his pal was nowhere to be found. Ortega was having the fence around the site repaired, and it must have been during the repair process that Buddy found his way out of the yard. Ortega scoured the entire area for hours, searching for Buddy, with no hint or clue as to where he might be. Days became weeks without a single clue as to Buddy's whereabouts. Ortega began to fear that he would never again see his faithful companion and guard dog. He had almost given up all hope when he received a most welcome phone call. Aaron Rees identified himself over the phone as the director of operations at the Southeast Area Animal Control Authority. Rees proceeded to tell Fabian that he was certain his missing dog Buddy was there at his facility. It was apparent, Rees said, that the dog had been hit by a car. He didn't know where that had happened, nor did he know how his 6-year-old German Shepherd mixed dog knew how to find Kaiser Hospital in Bellflower and to drag himself there after his accident. It was a complete mystery as to how Buddy ended up at the hospital. He had never been there before. Hospital employees noticed the dog navigate his way through the automatic doors as if he knew exactly where he was going and what he was doing. A security officer was called at one point to escort the dog out of the hospital. Yet Buddy courageously and with determination managed to drag himself back into the hospital ER and once again quietly lie down in the waiting room. Kaiser Hospital nurse Vangie Covivo said it was apparent that the dog was not going to move until he was at least seen by a physician. No one was able to coax the dog to stand up, even with the obvious pain of a dislocated or broken leg. Buddy showed no aggressive behavior, but was in fact very docile. Since nobody recognized the dog, finally the decision was made to call the Animal Control Authority to come and pick up the friendly pooch. Hospital employees joked that as far as they knew, Buddy was the first non-human walk-in patient the hospital had ever taken in. Was it the smell of a hospital? Was it the lure of an ambulance siren? Or just a very intelligent dog who somehow knew he would be treated kindly? It is impossible for us mere humans to know. Buddy made a full recovery and was back on the job at the construction equipment yard in a few weeks. What can one say? Our third story might be the most perplexing of all. It renders me speechless. During World War II, Captain Stanley Ray received his orders for overseas duty in the South Pacific. He had no choice but to leave his Cocker Spaniel Joker with family in Pittsburgh, California. Now, although he was quite familiar with Ray's family members, and he surely knew he would be treated well in his owner's absence, Joker became very despondent. In his doggy mind, it was quite obvious that he and Stanley had a special bond, a bond without which he could not live. Joker spent 2 weeks ignoring his food and moping. Then he disappeared. A few days later, 2 Army doctors reported seeing the stray dog in Oakland, about 30 miles from the Ray home in Pittsburgh. Now, Oakland was a major seaport. But before Joker could be caught, identified, and returned to Captain Ray's family, he had somehow managed to stow away aboard an Army transport ship bound for overseas duty in the South Pacific. Since this was a military operation, the commanding officers were not very tolerant of a stowaway dog. And Joker was about to be destroyed when a sympathetic Army major volunteered to adopt him and be responsible for him. It was another example of Joker's remarkably good fortune that the commander granted the major's request. This ship made several ports of call, and in each one, Joker was at the helm, sniffing the air and eyeing each seaport inquisitively. It was not until the ship docked at one particular South Pacific island that Joker jumped the ship and raced ashore. He was chased by several men, but the spaniel could not be deterred until somehow he was barking joyfully at the feet of a completely astonished Captain Stanley Ray. The major, Joker's adoptive master, was disappointed that the dog had found his true owner, but he could not dispute that Cocker's obvious joy at his reunion with Captain Ray. It was apparent to all who heard the story of Joker and his incredible journey that the courageous Cocker Spaniel had found his true master. Without any hard feelings, the major relinquished his claim on Joker. How Joker had managed to find Captain Ray on a military base on a faraway island in the Pacific Ocean remains an unfathomable mystery. Somehow Joker had homed in on his owner in a secret location in the South Pacific, approximately 5,500 nautical miles from home. And in point of fact, Captain Ray himself might not even have known exactly which South Pacific island would be his base of operations on the night he said goodbye to Joker. On the day of Joker's death, January 20, 1958, the Associated Press carried an account of Joker's journey, which is perhaps the ultimate lost and found dog miracle story. The remarkable Joker lived a rich and full 14 and 1/2 years. Until he died, he and Captain Ray remained inseparable. What that dog accomplished is simply unbelievable. He had never before been on a sailing vessel of any kind. How was he directed to the Oakland seaport, where he could view dozens of military vessels? And of those dozens, how could he possibly have chosen the very one that would take him to Captain Ray? Finally, how could he possibly have known which island harbored his master among the many seaports at which the vessel docked? We just don't know. We just don't understand. Here's our final story. Teddy Crockerwell would take no chance with his beloved dachshund, Sam, leaving the yard unescorted. So he had an underground electric fence installed and placed a collar sensitive to the fence line around Sam's little neck. If Sam should wander outside the invisible fence line, he would receive a slight shock that would warn him to retreat. All the time, Teddy knew Sam would never knowingly wander away. The two souls seemed connected on many levels. On Monday, April 7, 2008, Teddy Crockerwell succumbed to the cancer he had been valiantly fighting. And when the family returned from the hospital, the first thing they noticed was that Sam was not waiting for them. Sam had disappeared. Sam had never left home by himself. Despite an intensive search, it was apparent that the little dachshund had left him. How much Teddy had loved his little dog. And now both Teddy and Sam were gone. 2.5 days later, the family arrived at their church 6 miles away for Teddy's funeral. And there, sitting by the front doors, waiting for them, was Sam, shivering and shaking. The entire family simply lost it. One by one, they all picked him up and hugged him. Sam had never been to the church before, but somehow his little legs had brought him there. Somehow Sam had known Teddy had died. Had he run away to grieve in private? Somehow Sam had also known when and where the funeral service would be held. And he had walked there to join the family in their grief. Once again, I simply cannot begin to explain this. Dogs have been known to spend years near the grave of their human companion, or to return every day for years to the train station, where they would welcome their now deceased master returning home from work. No creature on our planet is a greater teacher of unconditional love than our dogs. I have read these stories many times, always in awe and wonder, and not infrequently in tears. Maybe, just maybe, in addition to unconditional love, dogs teach us a little humility. There is so much we don't know, so little we understand.